Thank you all for joining me today for a conversation on the importance of social services and social programs for the health of a community, what it means to have these available to a community, what our community in particular needs, maybe some of the things that we are lacking in our community, and some of the things that we do well in our community and have made a real difference and impact in our community. I want to welcome a number of guests to us today, and they will introduce themselves when they jump in to share throughout the course of our conversation today. So thank you all for being here. So the first question that I just want to put kind of out on the table and give everyone a chance to jump in and share is just a general question. And that is, what type or what do social services and programs contribute to a community in general? And how do we see these types of services and programs working here in Longview and Cowlitz County?
Hi, I'm Diane Cooper from the Family Health Center. I think that in this day and age, social services and health services provide additional support to individuals and families that maybe 100 or 150 years ago they got from their extended family or their smaller communities. Social services by no means replace those very important social connections with our friends, family, and neighbors, though. Ethically, we all as neighbors have, I think, a responsibility to do what we can to care for each other. I think social services in Cowlitz County are pretty robust. We have a lot of social services that other communities don't have, and we, by and large, work very well together to try to maximize what we all can do.
I'm Jeff Ritchie from Lower Columbia College, and also have a practice of psychotherapy here in town in Longview. I think social services are a vital part of any kind of society where people are going to live cooperatively. Not everybody is going to have the same means to produce. Not everybody is going to have the same needs to be met. And sometimes those who have means to produce more are going to be asked to provide for some of the people whose needs are a bit higher. The troubling thing about the way that I see social services working in our area is that there is a political and a conservative religious contingent that works very hard to oppose any kind of new innovations. For example, the reason we're having this call is because I was responding to Father Nick on a Facebook feed where he was really, expressing his disappointment with both the county and the city for not applying for a grant for homeless shelters, just because there could be no exclusions or barriers as part of the grant money. And and I'm with Father Nick and thinking that's asinine.
This is Allison Maddox, the pastor at Longview United Methodist Church, and I think one of the things that social services and programs contribute to a community is they address the need for a community to be healthy. And the healthiest communities are those that reach out to the people who are most vulnerable and in need in their society. The communities that ignore those needs end up being very unhealthy for all people. So I see that as a basic need for all people within a community to be able to address the needs of those that are most vulnerable. And there have been times that those needs have been addressed by various institutions and agencies. As with the growth in population, the growth in concerns has occurred, and so therefore maybe what has been exclusively the purview of one particular agency or institution can no longer be that just solely that agency or institution. It takes a conglomeration of people addressing issues together. And so there's a lot of intersection between those agencies and institutions to address these needs. And that requires some creativity and imagination, because rather than keeping on doing it the way it has always been done in the past, or only barely dipping into how we might be creatively answering some of these needs, it's going to take us working across a cross section of and working in institutions working together that maybe at one time we're at odds with one another, but need to keep a focus of the health of the community as a whole.
Chuck Hendrickson, Executive Director of Love Overwhelming. And I think that within the social services in our county, although there are gaps, with shelter, I mean, that's a gap we see right now. But as in large, there are agencies that are working together collaboratively that offer holistic services to our community for those that are in need. And that's one of the things that's really good and great about our community and those organizations in large that are working together to offer holistic services to help people move forward in whatever it is that their recovery or life needs are.
And this is Dave McClay, a CEO from Columbia Wellness. I will kind of echo what Diane and Chuck said. I do think there are quite a number of services here, but I also believe that one size shoe doesn't fit everything, and you can have a shoe try to do too many things, and I think there should be a lot of organizations helping people in their road to recovery or whatever that is. And so I do think it's important that we have choice and options in our community, and I believe we do have that, and we have a pretty good mix.
My name is Pastor Liz Carney. I'm a pastor here locally in Longview. Have worked with some of the folks on this call and working on the cold weather shelter. And I think many people have said this much better than I have, but when we care for those in our society who, as Jeff said, are not able to produce according to the American capitalist paradigm, right? When we care for those who are the most vulnerable in our community, it actually helps everyone. It makes the entire social fabric of our community stronger. I think, for so long, this gets into probably a larger philosophical conversation about what many people believe it means to be American, but so many folks have assumed that if you help your top performers in the society, it will trickle down to those who won't be able to provide for themselves in the same way that those of us who have more privilege on all kinds of different levels are able to. But really, in my experience and in everything that I've learned about how the world works, actually, when you care for, quote unquote, the bottom, the folks who are going to get missed by a lot of the things that we have in place in our society, it makes the whole community a lot healthier. So, and I think that social fabric, the pandemic has really revealed the various vulnerabilities and holes that we have in so many of our systems that are, I think, more robust in a lot of other countries. And I think we've seen that play out in the pandemic with how well or how not well societies have been able to cope with COVID-19. So from my perspective, that's a really great reason to have some of these robust services in our community, and why I'm passionate about that, as so many people are on this call already too.
So building off of that and that understanding that, we do have some robust programs, we do have some robust services, and it's important for the community to uphold those and to really encourage those and support them for the betterment of our community. How can those who are listening to this episode come alongside these different programs and organizations to encourage them in their work, perhaps even enable them to enhance their work to another level? What can people do to support this work?
This is Chuck Hendrickson, Low Overwhelming Executive Director. So yeah, I think a big thing is assuming the best out of organizations, and that we are trying to do what we can to help people move forward. And if there are pieces that you're not sure about, you have questions about, maybe, just maybe, you read something on social media that may not quite be 100% truth, reach out to those organizations. In my opinion, and what I've seen, and with my examples of working with these organizations, we are all very open and transparent, and we want to get the correct information out there. So if you guys have questions or anything like that, don't hesitate to reach out. That's one of the ways that people can have that education of what's going on in our community to be able to get it out to the people that may need those programs.
This is Pastor Liz again. I would also say get involved. So many of these organizations have tangible ways that everyday citizens like us can jump into the work that they are doing. And I know that once you have, as one of our colleagues on the cold weather shelter team, I remember he said this last year, he and then this resonated with me too, we needed to have skin in the game. And when you start to have a personal investment in the work that various social services offer in the community, then when those things start to come under critique from folks who may disagree with you, you actually know the folks receiving services and surviving because of those services. You're aware of the inner workings of an organization. You take ownership of it. It's a way of taking ownership in the community. So calling some of these social services and actually saying, how can I, here's what I'm good at. How can I use those gifts to support you in the work you're doing, and start volunteering.
This is Pastor Al. I was going to say, at the risk of stating the obvious, COVID has changed things for a lot of agencies, and it just has made, it hasn't created a barrier, but it's created some challenges for agencies. And to keep that in mind, as we are moving toward compassion.
This is Diane, and I'd like to thank what everybody has said. Pre-COVID, we at Family Health Center have always been up for, if people want to visit any of our clinics or any of our programs, see us in action. I think it does make a difference. It's easy, I think, when you walk down the street and see a homeless person in a doorway, to look the other way, not engage. And when folks come and sit for a minute or two in our harm reduction program or any of our clinics, and they see the folks that we serve in a whole different light. So COVID's made that a little harder, but people who are willing to mask up and keep social distance, I'm happy to host them in any of our sites.
Jeff Ritchie here again. Going off of what Allison and Diane were saying, yeah, COVID has changed things, and it began changing right in the middle of last year's emergency warm weather or cold weather shelter, when the rules got really tight about how many people could be in the bathroom at a time, admonishing people about washing their hands, and et cetera, et cetera. Since then, since finding that the virus spread so rapidly across the U.S., then things locked down even tighter and tighter. And I have no idea what an emergency warming shelter would look like this winter, but it's also my understanding, and maybe you can help me out with this. It's my understanding that there hasn't been an outbreak among our unhoused folks here. Okay, I see everybody shaking their head.
We haven't. This is Chuck Hendrickson, Level Overwhelming. Yeah, we haven't had one known case from the camp, at least that we're aware of, at all. So we're not aware of it. If that is the case, we're not aware of it and haven't worked with anybody. And I think that's Diane's case too.
Yeah, and I want to jump in here because I think one of the things that I personally experienced in volunteering and getting involved, and this is specifically with the severe weather shelter, but actually volunteering while shelter was in operation and seeing those who were coming to receive shelter, is understanding who's actually receiving the services and programs that we have in our community. And I think there's an understanding of who is accessing these things that is not actually reality to who is really accessing the services and programs that are available. And that really made a big difference in my understanding of who is in need in our community. And it further developed as well. My own child went through the Progress Center due to a speech delay, and getting to see that particular program at work in our community and the different families that are impacted by that work, and then doing some work with the school district and seeing how the Broadway Learning Center furthers that intervention work across all spectrums of our community, was really interesting to see how far social programs and services actually reach in our community.
Just a quick response to that, Nick. It's very important to shatter stereotypes. It's very important that people understand the truth of the people that we work with, and it kind of speaks to one of those Pratt's, or points refuted 1,000 times, which let's see, it can be summed up in a couple of different ways. Why should I pay for somebody who didn't earn it? God helps those who help themselves. What are some other, pick yourself up by your bootstrap, the bootstrap mentality kind of thing. And I think that seeing people as human beings first and getting to see people as human beings first means getting around the people and experiencing their human selves. But I just want to stick you a little bit there, because I actually don't care who's receiving services, because for me, my morality is based on human well-being. Am I increasing it? Am I doing anything to prevent it from happening? Am I causing any undue harm? Am I doing what I can to reduce undue harm? And so frankly, I don't care if all we're serving are the drug addicts and sex offenders, which we're not. We're not. I mean, that's just a portion of who we serve, because they're people. And I don't think that because you smoked some crack today or shot some heroin means that you have to live in life-threatening conditions tonight. That's where I come from.
This is Dave from Columbia Wellness. I'll speak for us. I think traditionally, as a nonprofit, we don't do a very good job marketing ourselves and the good things that we've done and who we've impacted and some of the positive stories. We just kind of move forward and do what we do. And I think there's a price that you pay doing that. And I think we've tried to get better at that. But I think traditionally that's been like that across the board. And I think as a nonprofit, we need to get some of our successes out there so people hear it.
Yeah, I think that's a very real reality for nonprofits across the board. When you are so dedicated to the work you are doing, you stay doing the work you are doing, and the work of marketing and public relations is not your priority, or your it's not the biggest role or office you have in your organization. But with that, it can be helpful to teach people about what you do and to show the impact that you are having. I agree with Jeff that it doesn't matter who someone is. We should be helping people because they're people. And from the Christian perspective, they're our neighbor, and we are called to love our neighbor, regardless of who they are or what walk of life they're on or where they come from. I mean, it's the story of, the different parables in Jesus sharing the story of the Good Samaritan, of showing it doesn't matter what you might think of someone, that person can blow your mind and be someone you don't think they could be. And it's because people are people. And if we just treat people as people and care for and love and provide for people, that makes a big difference in a community.
Yeah, that's Chuck Hendrickson, Love Overwhelming. I think that's exactly right. And I think that that's one of the things that we saw in our severe weather shelter is engaging with people right where they were, building that rapport, which then leads to trust. And when people trust you, they're more willing to say, hey, I need help. I'm ready to go right now. And then our staff are ready to go arm in arm, hand in hand. Let's go. Let's move forward with you. Because when people aren't motivated and you're trying to push them there, doesn't usually work out. But when we build that rapport and that trust, as we saw over and over again from people engaging in with people at the severe weather shelter or wherever they may be going, that leads to richer opportunities for the holistic services to take place to move forward. And that's what it's all about. I mean, right, we want to meet people right where they are, but we want to help them move to where they want to be in their life.
Chuck, do you think that that kind of rapport building would be possible with a more permanent sheltering situation that was indeed low barrier and accessible by anyone?
Yeah, I do believe that, and I think that even going beyond that, a hosted encampment, which in my opinion just looks like an emergency shelter that is done in tents and outside, I think that is an ability to be able to continue that rapport, because you're meeting people's basic immediate needs, not only shower, laundry, and a place to stay, but that human interaction of some positive interaction. And that's a big deal to people, in my opinion. I think that's a daily essential for individuals. And to have it in one spot, in one location where all the service providers can go there to work with those, with the individuals that are there, that creates more opportunities for services, housing, inpatient detox, harm reduction. I mean, all of that stuff. And I know that at least the agencies that we're partnering with, I mean, Family Health Center and Columbia Wellness that are on the line, that's what it's all about for all of us. And so it would be very, very helpful to have a place like that for sure.
I think we learned, we hosted last winter the day warming shelter for folks. And we really learned a lot from the folks that came and used that service. It helped us tweak little things in our programs that we hadn't even thought were barriers. You know, just from conversation with them, we got to know those folks and were able to hook many of them in much better to help improve their health. So I agree. I mean, it's about being there for people and being there consistently and building that trust. The hit or miss that sometimes happens now, if folks are so isolated and so just exhausted from trying to meet their basic needs, they can't even sometimes think of what help they need, much less be able to use our services. So anything we can do, and my folks that work here will probably kill me. They hate it when I walk in the morning and say I had a dream. And this is not Martin Luther King. It's like I think of all kinds of crazy things I think we should do. And we've done a good number of them. And some have worked and some haven't. But if you don't dream and you don't think outside the box and we don't all work together, we're going to continue having what we have and having the people that are spewing hate all over Facebook, ruling what our community can do to impact things positively.
Diane, this is Dave McClay again. I agree with that. And I think when you meet people where they're at, I think it gives you a different lens of how you view the services that they need versus the services you assume they need and how they want to be served versus, hey, this is what they need from us, and tailoring some of that service delivery to what is needed.
I have a question for the providers in the conversation. This is Allison. In the conversations I've had with people who were both at one time providers or in need of services, COVID having changed some things for some of the service providers and more things moving online. One of the difficulties being that not everyone has equal access to the technology. And I'm wondering if that is something that you as providers foresee will continue to be an issue going forward, that there will be some things that actually have moved online that might continue to be online when we eventually live in a post-COVID world, and none of us know exactly what that's going to look like. But I'm just wondering what ways and how technology might be changing some of this.
Jeff Ritchie, I talked with Anthony Reyes from Family Health Center, who said that the MyChart portal had increased, and maybe Diane can help follow up, had increased utilization of services by people.
That's true. We're getting a lot more people who are having either telephone or video appointments with their providers. But we also have a lot of patients who don't have access to the technology, or they have limited minutes on their phones. And so we've worked very hard to try to make sure that for folks that can't be served or prefer not to be served through telehealth, that we still are able to provide in-person services, even if they're sick. Sometimes those workarounds are interesting. You know, we're serving people out in their vehicles in our parking lot, for example, to some degree. But I think telehealth is always going to be with us going forward. I think more and more people are going to use it. The challenge is going to be for those people without maybe the skills or the Wi-Fi access, or without devices. How do we get those people devices and hooked to the internet so that we don't have haves and have-nots in the world of telehealth?
Thanks, Allison and Diane. And Jeff. As we've talked about already, and you know, some of the more pressing concerns in our community and areas where we're perhaps lacking the most in is how we address homelessness in our community. And so I want to just put out on the table for those to jump in, you know, how can we as a community better address homelessness in our community? How do we help those who are experiencing homelessness? How do we help our community understand what it means to be homeless and what people experience when they are homeless? And how can we maybe bring different models of programs or services that have had proven success in other areas into our own community?
This is Pastor Liz. The first shift that I feel desperately needs to happen in our community, and I think there's a lot of service providers who are already on board with this, but getting the rest of the community to come along, is moving to a housing first model of addressing homelessness. That's so many of you on this call have spoken so eloquently about this in public meetings and in our own conversations. And I think until that shift happens, I think we're going to continue to see so many of the gaps that we're seeing now. I think there's a mental shift that needs to happen. It's always mystifying to me why it doesn't resonate with more people that if you address Maslow's hierarchy of needs, if you start by addressing the most basic human needs of a place to sleep, clean water to drink, food to eat, if you address those concerns first, then you start to open up new pathways in relation as you build that relationship, and new things become possible about the kinds of care that person is able to receive, the kinds of recovery they're able to enter into, because they actually had a good night's sleep. They actually were able to take a shower. I don't feel like that's so far out of many people's experiences if they've ever had to stay up all night at the airport. I mean, it's such a poor comparison to make, but it's always mind-boggling to me how often that is missing from this conversation. Folks are so convinced that people need to, as Jeff was saying, pull themselves up by their bootstraps and get some things done, and then we will give them shelter, then we will give them housing. I can't think of anything productive I could do in my life without the place that I live. A place to go to the bathroom safely and hygienically, a place to take a shower, a place to sleep well at night. I would not be a functioning human without those things. So I think until we shift our focus and start to, rapidly house people and get them into a stable situation, we won't be able to address so many of the other issues that are facing them that are huge challenges, and that so many of the folks even on this call and their service provision are doing a great job of addressing in our community. And they could, I think all of you could address them more effectively if we got people into a stable housing situation. I'm recalling that one of the folks from the local legal aid board talked about, I remember in a public meeting, she was talking about, the conversations I have with my clients about their legal battles, so much of what is coming up is that they don't have a reliable place to store their belongings that is secure. And so until they have that, we can't work with them on these other things that are stopping them from getting into more housing, stopping them from getting a job, stopping them from, anyway, all of that. Once you get people housed, I think there's so much more that you can do with folks on their recovery journeys. And anyway.
I agree with you wholeheartedly, Liz. Jeff Ritchie again. Not only when you meet people's basic needs do you open up pathways for them to meet social needs and act more socially appropriate according to how our society says they should. When you meet people's basic needs, some of those problems actually disappear. All right, the anxiety, the depression, some of the substance use problems, poof. I've often said, sometimes in public, that if you see a person laying in a doorway and you say to them, you must get a job, but you do not yourself have a job to offer them or are unwilling to give it to them, then your advice is useless.
I wholeheartedly agree, Liz and Jeff, with you. And at the same time, think that one of the pieces that sometimes gets missed is the need for community. And my understanding and talking with some people about what then becomes a challenge, maybe when someone receives housing themselves, is that their need for community brings along providing housing maybe for other people who are still dealing with some challenges. And so then the housing ends up not working out because maybe some of those people in that community that they brought into the housing with them weren't ready to make some changes. And I think that the community piece of having people who maybe have been in an encampment and have we might deem it somewhat dysfunctional, but at least it has provided some sense of community. That piece cannot be overstated in meeting people's needs. And I've mentioned before, in just in the vein of Diane talking about the dreaming, there's a intentional community called Community First Village in Austin, Texas. That's a 51-acre master planned community specifically for people who were experiencing didn't have housing, and it affords affordable permanent housing. And I think one of the things that we in our community are challenged by is affordable housing.
Chuck Hendrickson. So first, I want to say there are different phases of homelessness that people are in, and with that, there are different programs that are out there. And you can see that in the middle of the road and the people that may be more housing ready, there are programs for them in different places. And however, there are there is a huge need for people who don't fit into those types of programs. And so that's where you see a lot of the creativity within the different agencies and programs to be able to get people served. We love that. We love that we can work with like Family Health Center and Columbia Wellness for people that may not quite fit that mold, but they have times where we can bring them in for their behavioral health appointment or for their medical appointment where they've set up for just for in that case, you know, for walk-ins. And so it's having those, seeing those barriers and then trying to creatively fill those needs, and is a big thing working together. And so although there are a lot of barriers still and a lot of needs within the people that are unhoused, there's still a lot of good things going on within that population and within those services.
If I remember correctly, I believe I was told that some of the people that are ready for the Family Promise Program, which is one of the service providers in the community, there are people that are ready to move into that program, but that means some of the families that are currently in the program need to be able to move on into their own housing, and the housing's not there. So I don't know enough about how you create affordable housing for people, but I know that having had several congregation members who needed to find affordable housing, it took months and months for them to find affordable housing. And thankfully they were, I can think of at least 2 people who had someone within the congregation who was willing to let them come stay with them while they were looking for something that they could get into. And they were looking for Section 8 housing, and it took months for something to come up for them.
And that is affordable housing, as we stated, is a huge issue. I mean, last summer there were over 70 households that had housing choice vouchers, and they had to stop looking for housing because no one could find housing. They had to stop giving out the vouchers. They shut down everything. It's since opened up since then, but I mean, that's a lot. It is saturated. And the last I saw, we were at 0.8% of vacancy for affordable housing.
Yeah, and I want to talk about Family Promise for just a second. It's a wonderful program, and it does a lot of really great work. And it's fairly new in our community. It's been in operation for just over a year. But one of the things that certainly has been a struggle, Family Promise, in terms of the people that are accessing the services they provide, the families who become Family Promise families, are people who are the best candidates to receive housing and to get work and to move from a place of being unhoused back into stable housing. These are family units that are really the best candidates for that. And they're struggling to place families into units because there just isn't affordable housing available to people in our community, particularly families. And I know there's been families that have gone through there with single parents who are working full time and providing for their children and still can't find a place to live that's affordable and safe for their family. And that goes to show that even in an organization that is actively working to house people in our community, how long it takes to get that to be a success. And that clearly shows an area where our community is lacking in an availability standpoint.
This is Diane. So in our community, one of my personal dreams is that in spite of not buying lottery tickets, I would win the lottery, buy 40 acres in the middle of Longview and put up affordable housing. But shelters capacity can help in that arena, but it's not really going to be a long-term solution. We have to work all sides of this issue. And I have really struggled with a hosted encampment, a hosted shelter, low barrier, but there's no place for folks to graduate, so to speak, to a more permanent housing situation. And if we're able to get them housing, we're isolating them from their social support network. And this to me is really an issue that the real estate agents and the land developers and everybody in this community needs to work together to solve. Because the puny stuff that Family Health Center can do, we can do a little bit, but we can't solve the problem. So we need all of us. And I think the larger issue for me is at this point, how do we all get beyond the political posturing and just get over it and start working together and get it done?
Yeah, I completely agree with Diane. I think it's going to take new combinations of organizations and different groups working together to come up with new ideas. One of the things I'm excited about that our congregation is doing is we've had a vacant lot on the other half of our land for, since the 70s. Since they bought the land, they thought maybe we'll expand the church someday. And, actually, just in the last few weeks, we finally got it approved through our presbytery, our larger regional body, to be able to donate that land to Housing Opportunities of Southwest Washington so that they can build affordable housing there. Because our church has vacant lands that we can donate. We do not have case managers. We do not have the kind of wherewithal to be landlords. But Housing Opportunities of Southwest Washington used to be the housing authority. They have all that. They do that really well. So what we can do well as a community of faith is be a really good neighbor and provide kind of a social fabric for those folks to be welcomed into. We can be checking in with them once that housing is built and find ways that we can serve them. But we don't have to, but we can let Housing Opportunities of Southwest Washington, this incredible organization, do what they're good at. And fill a need that they had. So I think there's so many of those puzzle pieces that I'm excited when all of us have these conversations together to figure out who can provide what. I know that, St. Stephen's is another great example. I know that they had that empty parish hall space that they could use overnight for youth who are experiencing homelessness. So they were able to open up their space, but then the staff could provide some care for the youth coming into that space and their families. And I think there's a lot of creativity that can be sparked from, instead of lamenting what we don't have, of saying, what do we have? And what kind of creative combinations can we experiment with? Because it's all experimental. And we need more experiments like that in an age where things are unprecedented, right? We need to try different things because the old ways of addressing these problems either haven't worked, and we see that now because of the pandemic, or things are different because of the pandemic. And so we're going to have to try new experimental ways of addressing these issues. So that gives me hope. And hopefully the more things like that start happening, it'll sort of spark creativity in other places.
First of all, I want to say thanks to Pastor Liz for reaching out to the presbyters and the larger region of the church and making such a generous donation to Housing Opportunities Southwest Washington. That's amazing. That's one of the other problems that we have, and Diane mentioned we have to work this issue from all sides. And the reason why we have to work this issue from all sides, I think, again, comes down to a large group of loud naysayers who have okay, so it's interesting because you have some people who are, in places of power, real estate agents who sit on city council, what have you. And then you have the people who vote for them, who largely, are the kind of people who wouldn't have a job to offer to the guy living in the doorway, but they eat up the propaganda in these Facebook troll pits, and they spew out these threats again and again and again. One of them being, how do we pay for this, right? How do we gather the money for this? And it doesn't seem, they're immune to evidence, right? It doesn't seem to matter how many social scientists and economists and psychologists that you put their papers in front of them and say, look, here, this is what happens when you do this, right? As a matter of fact, it ends up costing you less just to provide housing, which, by the way, is the only solution for homelessness, is to provide housing. And I'm a fan of the direct approach, and doing it that way. Very, very difficult to do with the groups that are in power in this community. So what I was hoping, and to go back to the first question, how can we help? What I was hoping is that by changing out some of the members that sit on our governing bodies like City Council, we would be able to get some progress made. And certainly we are not seeing unanimous votes anymore, which is a relief, because now there's a record of some dissent. But we still have a right-wing, conservative, evangelical, fundamentalist majority that sort of sits on their high horse and says, well, I'm not paying for that. But in fact, they already are, but it doesn't seem to click.
So this is Diane. One thing I'll say is that the folks, Jeff, that you're speaking about, that group was very opposed to the harm reduction program, the needle exchange. And at one point or another, I've had conversations with all of them individually, not so much as a group. And I don't know that I have a goal of changing their minds. I have a goal more of speaking truth to power and hoping that someday they, that we can all agree on some kind of action together. So I'm one of those folks that I'm never willing to give up hope and belief that just if we try to treat each other as human beings, many of those folks I think are in as much pain in their lives in many ways as I might be in my life, or any of the homeless folks are in their lives. And I just have to keep reminding myself of that, not to lecture anybody, but I don't agree with their viewpoint, but I think I have to just keep banging my head against that brick wall.
Well, and to add to that, Diane, I have not spent a long time in this community. I've only been here a little over 4 years, but I actually think there's a huge amount of trauma that has been experienced by many members of our community, particularly around addiction. Almost most families that I've engaged with here in town, from all across the political spectrum, because there's no, addiction doesn't just target one certain kind of person, right? Have had some family member, some person close to them, it could be themselves, who have actually lived in addiction before, or lost someone because of addiction. And I think there's so much unaddressed trauma in our community around that. And I think what that trauma can lead so many folks to do is to find a convenient scapegoat placeholder, which I think often is folks who are experiencing homelessness, unfortunately, to kind of be a stand-in and representative for those people who caused this pain in my life. And I think that gets wrapped up in these conversations so often. It's kind of, for me, it seems like it's kind of under the surface of all the arguing and debating, is this really deep pain and hurt. I'm sure it comes from multiple sources, but I think specifically around addiction is where I've seen it in my pastoral work with people.
And so they say, well, I don't want those kinds of people here. I don't want to serve those kinds of people. And so there's two Pratts in this. Number one, that services attract service recipients. I've plowed through the social science literature, and there seems to be a consistent number of people, no matter where you are, that are transient. They come and they go, usually around 15%. 85% are people who live here, or wherever it is that they were. So it's not that a bunch of people are going to flock to the area. And the other one is that if we're so afraid of having sex offenders in our community, well, why don't we provide a place where they can be? For example, the sex offenders who live next to you right now and who are registered, and they just happen to have a house, so you don't see them out on the street. Drug addicts and alcoholics who manage to stay housed because they have family or they have good jobs and are somehow functional still. They live right next door to us. And so I think that, taking a look at some of the, gosh, I don't know what more to say about that, actually.
Something that was brought up earlier that started rattling around in my brain had to do with the monetary cost to having people who repetitively need services, that we're only used to taking a look at budgets and services provided and the cost of them as the upfront cost. We're not used to taking a look at the behind cost, and it made me wonder if it would behoove all of us to start talking about and taking a look at what the back end costs are when people are denied those services up front because it's too costly. I started thinking about the waste that occurs when within our own household budgets, we can only afford to buy some kind of an implement or appliance or whatever that we know really is going to break within a couple of years, but that's what we can afford. And we don't talk about what the long-term cost of that is in terms of, the environmental waste and all that kind of thing for what planned obsolescence does. And it makes me think maybe we need to start looking at different ways of reporting actual costs.
Yeah, definitely. I want to just, before we end our conversation today, I want to thank everyone again for joining in. And I want to kind of put a last question out on the table for folks to engage with and an opportunity to dream, as Diane said earlier. And that question is where do you see our community moving forward? Or what are your dreams for our community moving forward when it comes to the services and programs that we can offer and want to offer, and how might we go about seeing that become reality?
This is Pastor Liz again, and I said it earlier, but I will say it again. I think we just need to try things. We need to experiment, and we need to constantly be evaluating how those experiments went, and then we need to try something new. I think so. That's my first answer, is getting creative and trying some things we haven't tried before. And I think secondly, we need to appreciate and we need to value the work of all the different service providers in our community. I think I heard Father Nick say this in a recent city council meeting, that our community seems to operate out of this scarcity mindset, like there's not enough. We don't have enough to address the problems in our community. And the reality is that there's actually abundance. There are lots of people who care. There's actually lots of wealth in our community to be shared. And I think so often people see that we have to choose either or, like it's this organization or that organization, instead of all models being welcome and celebrated, because there's such a spectrum of folks in need of support. And I think until we're willing to celebrate every single organization that is doing the work along that spectrum, I think until we do that, I think we're going to continue to keep running our head against a wall. Because all these different services depend on each other. That's been, in my limited experience getting involved with the cold weather shelter, I've said this before, but one of the most frequent calls that I got on our hotline was from folks in high barrier shelter situations asking and hoping that our cold weather shelter was open, calling the line to be like, are you open tonight? Because they needed to know if they could send people to us. And so we might have this narrative where those organizations are competing with each other, but in reality, they depend on each other to be successful. And so, yeah, those would be my two pieces of hope and advice for our community.
Kind of piggybacking off of what Liz said, this is Allison. I think there is also a false dichotomy that is set up, not just in this community, it's a nationwide false dichotomy, which is you either have business growth or you have social services, and it's as if you can't have both. And
say it again, Allison.
Yeah, it's just a false dichotomy that is patently untrue. They work together, and that could be one of the most key components of us becoming the healthiest community that we can be, is for those two things to see that they need each other.
I think for me, dreaming big, and what we see out there is again going back to a place where people are, that there's a space for all of our organizations, all service providers to offer those holistic services. I think that's a real big thing, and I think that can be done. It can be done in a low barrier model. I think that the severe weather shelter the last year proved that, with all of the outreach to the community, the Good Neighbor Agreement, all of the components that we worked on for months, taking the input and being able to implement those. I think that's a big deal, and I think that moving forward, that's at least one of those things that I see as a big dream, that would have a space for that homeless encampment and a place for all the service providers to come and offer those services. Of course, affordable housing is increase is the number one thing we need. We understand that, but we need to see that other people can get into those services. And I believe that it can be done in an organized, efficient manner, even while it's done in low barrier. You look at city council meetings, county commissioner meetings, those are all low barrier and done in an efficient manner. And so with that, I think it can still be done as a community works together.
So I would like to see services in every single neighborhood. I'd like to see mixed housing in every single neighborhood. While many of our richer neighborhoods are beautiful, they lack some vibrancy because they don't have the rich mixture of folks that they could have. I'd like to see that, just like elementary school areas, that folks can walk to get services close to where they live or close to where they work.
Jeff here. One of the areas in that my family and I began working on when we got here, just a little bit before Liz, we got here in 2014, was visibility, and that mixed housing is a piece of visibility. When you see a person as your neighbor every day, it's harder to have that impression or that stereotype or that cookie cutter mentality about them. So now our work has primarily been with the LGBT community and sort of raising the vibration in that area in our community. And we certainly have found some great collaborators who have helped us to, at least before this year and COVID-19, put on not only the first public Pride events in Longview, but the biggest one. They just got bigger year after year. And I think that kind of thing is important. So yeah, mixing people together and having people see each other as neighbors, I think will go a long way in that model.
This is Dave. I would say, for me, I would love to see I guess kind of more of a seamless transition between services and providers. And I think we do a pretty good job of trying to work together. It's just sometimes kind of difficult because we have different criteria to get in or out, and that's not anybody's fault. But if I had something I'd like to see improve, that would be it. And I think that would go a long ways to getting people in to service and maybe keeping them engaged in service.
Well, thank you all for what you've shared today, your expert experiences, and the hopes and potential for our community that does exist out there. And it is something that we can, as a community, engage in and work towards if we choose to. And I think that's a big part of what it ultimately comes down to, is we have to make that choice. So thank you all for sharing.